everything was going well at LAS. I've been part of LAS for many years. So, and Rosemary and I have worked together many times, and as well as with Dr. Fernandez. So, we're both LAS folks, even if you may not know us very well. All right, so we'll get things moving along. Just a few housekeeping bits for everyone. So every participant has 15 minutes for your presentation, and to help you along the way, I'm going to hold up some signs, if that would be preferable, to let you know you have 5 minutes left, which is like a yellow light, right? And then 2 minutes left, sort of a quasi red light. And then if you go beyond the time, we'll probably ask you to wrap it up, if that's all right. So actually, Bailey, just a quick question. Would you prefer, and can you see these signs, or would you prefer that I say you have 5 minutes left, but I feel bad interrupting you, but whatever you're most comfortable with is what counts.
Signs okay.
Signs? Okay, you can see those well enough? Okay, perfect. So related to that, for those of you who aren't presenting, as I see, I think everybody has, if you could turn on your mute, as well as remove your video, just so it isn't distracting for Bailey when she's trying to find the sign that I'm holding up, and you have all these video images all over the place. So thank you for that. Save your questions to the very end as well, please, after all of the presentations. So we'll take, just write down your questions on a piece of paper or enter them in your phone or whatever. And then at the very end, in about an hour from now, because each presentation is about 15 minutes, we'll take all your questions, and you can just raise your hand on the screen, because might be a little bit hard and difficult for us to use the chat. So just raise your hand, and we'll take all your questions at that time. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I missed. Again, just make sure you look up every once in a while, because I will be holding up signs as we get closer. So, Rosemary, is there anything else that you can think of that I may have missed?
No, I think you covered it all. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And like I said, make sure you raise your hand, right? If you have a question at the end, right?
Presentations will be recorded, right, Rosemary?
Yeah, it's recording right now. Catherine reminded me
to
turn it on. Yes.
Perfect.
And so our first presenter is Billy Wilson, and the title of their presentation is Latinx English language learners in Wisconsin schools. Okay, Billy, you can start.
Take it away.
Okay. Okay, so as I said, my name is Bailey Wilson. I'm going to be presenting my capstone, which is called Latinx English Language Learners in Wisconsin Schools, a case study. I first like to start with the land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge that UW-Eau Claire occupies the sacred and ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. I honor the land of the Ojibwe and Dakota nations. So first, I'm just going to go into an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to start by talking about Latinx English learners, both in Wisconsin and nationwide, and whether they're getting the supports that they need. Then I'm going to talk about what my research questions were and some prior studies that led me into what I wanted to look into. And then the current study, which is an anonymous survey, and then I'm going to talk about what my results were. And then some conclusions and implications more specifically for educators, but also for everybody to keep in mind in general. First of all, Latinx English learners in public schools. So nationwide, 1 in 5 students speak a language other than English at home, and 70% of those students speak Spanish as their home language. So there has been a dramatic growth of Latino English learners in the past 4 decades across the country. More specifically in Wisconsin, the Latinx population has grown as well. In 1970, there was 1.4% of Wisconsin's population was Latinx, and in 2014, that number grew to 6%. Also in 2014, the proportion of Latinx students in Wisconsin public K-12 schools was 11% of all students. And English learners in general also has grown. So in 2000, it was 2.6% of all students, and in 2018, that number was 6.4%. So you can see that these populations are growing, and so we need to pay more attention to how they're getting support and making sure that they're being supported adequately in schools. Now I'm going to talk about whether they're getting the supports that they need. So I have a couple quotes here from one of the studies that I looked at. So English learners are significantly less likely than other students to score at or above a basic level of achievement regardless of the subject. ELs are less likely to have access to high quality teachers, resources, and assessments that are appropriate. ELs are overrepresented in special education programs, and the population is growing rapidly, but teacher training is pervasively lacking and outdated. So as you can see, they are not necessarily getting this as much support as they should be getting, and there's definitely room for improvement. Now I just want to talk a little bit about where I was getting my background research and how it led me to what I wanted to look into. The first one I want to talk about is language instruction, educational programs, and academic achievement of Latino English learners. So this one was an overview of different types of programs in different states and talked about how state policy affects academic achievement based on the type of program. The next one is creating and sustaining inclusive instructional settings for English language learners. So this one talked about what inclusive settings for them means and specifically what the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has done. The next one is the condition of education in Wisconsin. So this was a survey done by the Wisconsin Center for Educational Research at UW-Madison of teachers around Wisconsin. And then the last one is Latino English learners bridging achievement and cultural gaps between schools and families. So this was a focus group of parents and teachers in a rural school in the Rocky Mountains region. Now, what are my research questions? What are the legal precedents for English language support? Which strategies work well, which fall short? What programs are in place in Wisconsin? Are the families and cultural backgrounds of Latinx EL students being sufficiently supported and involved? Are teachers sufficiently prepared to support Latinx EL students? And how can Latinx ELs be better supported in Wisconsin schools? So first, what are the legal precedents for English language support? One of the first cases that really pushed this issue into the spotlight was Law v. Nichols in 1974, which argued that if English language learners were not receiving adequate support, that was in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This led to the Equal Educational Opportunity Act of 1974, which legally required supports for ELs, but didn't specify the type of program it had to be. And then there's a case that was in 1981, Castaneda versus Bickard, which recommended criteria for complying with the Equal Education Opportunity Act, including language instruction educational programs that are supported by experts, having districts provide adequate resources and personnel, and constantly evaluating and adjusting the program. Next, which strategies work well and which fall short? So in the past, there was more of a deficit model blaming the students for the low achievement. It has since gotten better as educators have realized how important it is to support these students in their language learning journey. There have been studies found that pull-out practices and teaching English separately from other languages or from other subjects, hinders continuous learning. So the push now is for more inclusive learning environments for these students. So those cultivate language proficiency to academic grade level, ensure access to high quality curriculum within effective teaching and learning environments, and promote sociocultural integration of all students. So more generally, being very beneficial for English language students is culturally responsive instruction. So that addresses the needs of all students, affirms each student's cultural identity, and draws upon students' backgrounds as an asset. Next, more specifically, what is in place in Wisconsin for ELs. So Wisconsin state law requires bilingual education when there are 10 ELs with the same native language in grades K through 3, or 20 ELs in grades 4 and higher within a school building. However, if this criteria isn't met, the EL students still, they're required to get support. It just doesn't have to be in a bilingual model. So Wisconsin used to have response to intervention, or RTI, but has since been adjusted to be Wisconsin's equitable multi-level systems of support. So this chart on the right here is what that is. So it's a focus on equitable services, practices, and resources, having high expectations for all students, creating welcoming environments, and sustaining students' identities, home cultures, and language. There's also a focus on family engagement. And then there's still the continuum of supports with a strong universal level, which is kind of where the RTI comes into that. And Wisconsin DPI also created Culturally Responsive Education for All Training and Enhancement, or CREATE, which is an organization for professional development for educators in culturally responsive practices. Next, are families and cultural backgrounds being sufficiently supported and involved? So there's been a lot of research showing that bridging students' home and school lives helps create a sense of belonging and can be beneficial for their academic achievement. In the survey of teachers in Wisconsin, they said that engaging with parents is one of the most difficult tasks that they face in supporting ELs. And in the focus group in the Rocky Mountain School, they found that communication gaps were a barrier to student achievement, whether that's because of the language barrier, the parents seeing the school environment as unwelcoming, or feeling silenced and ignored. And they found that they need consistency across grade levels and schools within a district. Next, are teachers sufficiently prepared to support Latinx EL students? So in the survey of teachers and principals across Wisconsin, 65% of them had taught ELs within the last 3 years. However, most of them had not participated in any EL-specific professional development during that time. Of those who had, the most common ones were culturally responsive education practices, research-based instructional methods for ELs, and assessment strategies. And in the focus group of teachers and parents in the Rocky Mountain School, they found that they needed more training on EL strategies, best practices, and multiculturalism for all teachers, not just EL teachers. So now I'm going to talk about what my current study is. So I conducted an anonymous survey, and it was sent out to Latinx EL students, their caregivers, general education teachers, special education teachers, English language teachers, and administrators. And I conducted this survey at 2 schools in Wisconsin, one of them being a rural middle/high school, grades 6 through 12. And that school has 14.8% of their school being limited English proficient. And then the other one is an urban elementary school, grades K through 5, with 3.1% students who are limited English proficient. And so far I have 53 completed surveys. And as you can see, most of them were either the students or general education teachers. And I still have my survey open, so I'm hoping to receive more, especially from caregivers, because their input is really important. But yeah, now I'm going to talk about some of my results. So I compiled all of the strategies that were suggested by everyone who took the survey and ordered them in what was most commonly mentioned. So the most commonly mentioned thing was encouraging use of Spanish to scaffold, whether that's having an assistant who speaks Spanish in the classroom, allowing the use of translations, or allowing students who speak Spanish to work together and be able to use their language in order to help them. The next most common thing was visuals, images, and graphics. So really focusing on multimodal instruction. The next was one-on-one or small group instruction with a certified EL teacher, so getting them more individualized support. The students said that speaking practice with their friends and specific help with reading was most helpful for them. A lot of teachers mentioned online resources such as translators or Grammarly. And then they also mentioned explicit vocabulary instruction, modifying, adapting, or differentiating assignments, tests, and texts, and more generally culturally responsive practices. The next part of the survey results is family and cultural involvement. So overall, the caregivers felt mostly supported and sufficiently accommodated by the schools. And then I have 2 charts here from the student survey. So the first one is, do you ever learn about things in school that you can connect to your family traditions and background? As you can see, most of them said sometimes, and then the rest of them fell more towards never or almost never, with only 2 of them saying always. And then the other one asked them, do you see people that look like you in the things you read and watch in school? And as you can see, all of them said either never, almost never, or sometimes. So as you can see, the students being reflected in what they're learning in school can definitely be improved. And the last part of the survey result, or this is the second part of that, is the family and cultural involvement. So on these charts, the blue is general ed teachers, green is the EL teachers, and purple is the special ed teachers. So I asked, do you feel you're able to maintain a sufficient level of communication with families who speak Spanish? As you can see, most of them said probably not, and it was a little bit spread out, but I found it interesting that the only ones who said definitely yes were EL teachers or special ed teachers. And in the other survey, the other part of the survey they had more training specifically in helping EL students. So I wonder if that had something to do with it, but I found that interesting. And then I also asked, how do educators incorporate, respect, and honor the cultural backgrounds of students in their classes? Most commonly mentioned was diverse materials or books with diverse characters, respecting students and their traditions, giving them opportunities to share their experiences and talking about which holidays they celebrate, building community, and encouraging use of home language. Next is the teacher preparation part of it. So EL teachers regarded that more teacher involvement, training, and consistency would benefit EL students. And the first chart here is asking, do you feel adequately prepared to support ELs in your classroom? can see most of them said probably not or might not, but there was nobody who said definitely not, so that is good. And then the next one is, do you feel that ELs in your class or school receive adequate support in their language learning? Kind of across the board, most of them not too sure, but there is supports in place. So I found it interesting that most of them were might or might not, or probably yes. And then the next part, I asked, how much Spanish do you personally know, to kind of get at that language barrier? Most of them said a little. And then, have you received training and best practices for supporting ELs in your classroom? So there were only a few who had not received any training. And then the rest I divided up by what type of training they had. Most commonly was having some sort of professional development or teacher in service. And as you can see, the special ed teachers had received a lot more training, specifically in that area, than the general ed teachers. So now just some conclusions and things to think about moving forward. So overall, what I noticed was a focus on culturally relevant pedagogy. So just making sure your students see themselves represented in what they're learning in school, getting to know students and their backgrounds, and allowing them to use their first language as a scaffold when possible. Also, family communication and accommodation is essential because it's important for that connection to be in place in order to help the students better. It's important for teachers to seek out professional development training to better support EL students. And then some strategies that were mentioned over and over again were visuals, repetition, explicit instruction, online resources, and adaptions. And then I think the biggest takeaway is just having respect, understanding, and patience for these students and their families, and just wanting the best for them and helping them to succeed. That is it.
Thank you, Bailey.
Thank you, Bailey. Our next speaker is Hannah Pakkala, and the title of their presentation is Equity in the Classroom for English Language Learning Hispanic Latinx Students.
Hi. One second, let me just get my screen shared with you all. Great. Okay, excellent. So let me probably start, it would be helpful too. I just want to start off by acknowledging that the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire occupies sacred and ancestral lands to Indigenous peoples, and that I honor the land of the Ojibwe and Dakota nations. So, yes, as previously stated, I have been able to study equity in the classroom for Hispanic and Latinx ELL students. Specifically, I have been able to do this through a student teaching placement of mine in Arcadia, Wisconsin. So, okay. Oh crap, that's my screen share. Sorry, hold on one sec. I'm on the screen share, not on my actual slides. Oh my gosh.
Hannah, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. So as I was saying, Arcadia, Wisconsin is located in rural western Wisconsin. It has a population of about 3,031 residents, about a third of which are native Spanish speakers. And I was able to also see this in their educational settings, as many of the students there also come from native Spanish speaking families. So a few other fast facts you should know about Arcadia are that the population has been growing by about 13% for the past 3 consecutive years. This is a growing community. 17.98% of that community is a population that does not identify as a US citizen or is an immigrant. And 98% of that group has Hispanic or Latinx heritage. 68% of those individuals are between ages 5 to 17, meaning the majority of the population of immigrant Spanish-speaking people in Arcadia are students in the Arcadia School District. So one other really interesting statistic about Arcadia is the discrepancy between educational attainment in the different ethnic backgrounds of the town. So about 54.2% of Hispanic and Latinx students graduate high school, while a whopping 89.6% of their white students are high school graduates. This is a very large discrepancy, and for that reason, I wanted to focus my case study on what supports are being offered for the students at the school district in order to help close that gap. So before we can look at what we're doing to fix it, there are certain barriers that we need to acknowledge that exist in this setting. So these intersectional barriers include language, immigration, and academic achievement. So the way that language can play a role as a barrier or a bridge is that if you look at the dual language system of hypothesis, this for English language learners means that they already have a semantic system in Spanish developed in their brain. So they already have a complete system of learning and understanding that exists in their primary language, while they're also learning English and a bajillion other subjects at the same time in school. So as these students are trying to acquire all of this information, they're also having to process it in a second language that is not as developed as their first semantic system. And what Arcadia has been able to do through their dual language program is they have been able to bridge that gap and bridge that learning through content instruction in their primary language, and then additionally recovering that language or recovering that information in their second language. So my student survey, I took a small survey of about 14 students, mixed grade levels, about half male and half female. And these students spoke a mix of Spanish, Mixteco, and some English. So the majority of these students come from a Spanish-speaking background. And many of them had taken dual language classes before, demonstrating the need for this in that community. So another school that I do want to look at also in this presentation is the Tucson Unified School District. They also are implementing programs which take on a critical multicultural perspective in order to help address the needs of those students. So in the Tucson Area School District, there are many students that identify with a Chicano or Chicana background. And for that reason, they were able to implement a Chicano-Chicana Studies program, which overall was able to help those students have better test scores and higher academic achievement through developing a deeper sense of identity and being able to relate to the content more in their classrooms. Dr. Augustine Romero, one of the founders of their program, pointed out that this traditional public school setting has not served these students and has in fact been oppressing and subordinating them in comparison to their white counterparts. Whereas implementing programs such as the Chicano or Chicana Studies program has been able to help those students in ways they were not able to originally be able to receive in the past. So another layer of that is the experience of being an immigrant in Latin America, in which about 1/4 of Arcadia's population can identify with. This is due to in Arcadia, this is due to a job availability provided from two major companies, the Ashley Furniture Manufacturing Company, and less known, but still very widely providing jobs, is the Pilgrim Poultry Company. So many of the students from these families are experiencing a type of poverty because while their families have jobs, these are not the best or most secure jobs. And this adds another layer of inability or of struggle as they're going through this educational experience. So Francisco Jimenez is one of the authors they study in Arcadia High School. And this is actually in their English classes. And they study a story called Cajas de Cartón. And they talk about the perspective of Panchito, who is also a child of immigrant parents trying to go to school in the United States, and his struggles. And it's very similar to the students in Arcadia, in which they have gaps in their education and a lot of the content is hard for them to comprehend because it's not in their first language. So relating this back to my case study, the dual language classes at Arcadia High School are in the four main content areas: math, science, social studies, and English. And what happens is the content is implemented in first their original language and then reviewed in the target language, not only helping students understand the content better, but also helping them to understand their second language better. So I was able to conduct a short survey as well as interview Sam Valentine, a math teacher at the high school. What I found in my survey was that there are many benefits for these students. The top 3 benefits being that it's much easier for them to understand the content. They feel more comfortable asking for help in class, and they feel more comfortable participating in classroom. So this is very significant, although it is not without its drawbacks. A couple students did give me feedback as well, stating that they felt they had less exposure to English than they normally would in their regular classroom settings. However, these students did have very many wonderful things to say as well, including that the classes are great and they hope they continue at Arcadia High School, and also that it's a lot easier to comprehend and remember things in their English. So, so I also was able to interview a math teacher, as I said before. Samantha Valentine has been a math teacher at Arcadia for 6 years and is currently teaching geometry as her dual language course. Now, she only has a Spanish minor, but she is the math teacher with the most experience in the department. And for this reason, she is the teacher in charge of the dual language classes. The way that she got involved with these classes was through first originally adding Spanish chunks into her original math classes, which students observed and were able to get help with. So then there were more students coming into these classes, more students, and she was able to finally create a dual language math class. So because of that, she's been able to bridge language and content, develop interpretational strategies for their second language, and been able to maintain student learning objectives that are required at a high school state level. Great. So in all, these immense discrepancies that are between Hispanic, Latinx, and white students come from ELL resources and lack of availability, supports for migrant learners, and from the educators' cultural comprehension. However, at Arcadia High School, through the dual language program, they've been able to combat these barriers for the students by creating linguistic functions to help the students achieve higher test scores and overall better academic achievement. So what does this mean for us in relation to public schools and their supports for ELL learners? Anna Tusi states that in the broader scope of the United States society, the institution of public education is one of the many spaces that replicate homogenic norms. The foundational laws of public education are constructed through colonial understandings of inclusion and therefore establish it as a tool to promote and continue the dominant culture. So, applying this to Arcadia High School, they have derived from the norm, from the public education that caters mainly to the white students in order to better support their students in adverse and unique learning settings. But how can we do that ourselves? Well, there's a few different levels of implementation for this. First of all, on the individual level, we are able to conduct research, we can look up for ourselves different demographics, culture, and even trying to understand the language. Furthermore, if you don't speak the language, that's totally okay, and it's totally understandable. But if you are able to translate documents and resources for students and their families so that you are still able to communicate that across, that will help them immensely in terms of having support in their academic setting. Additionally, accommodations in assignments, assessments, classroom settings, and resources for those students is going to provide them the supports that they need that they may not normally receive, especially given those intersectional barriers in their education. On a district and staff level, professional development sessions that illuminate multiculturalism and illuminate trauma-sensitive schools and to better understand where these students are coming from is going to help us as a staff and professional community be able to support these students better. Furthermore, being able to discuss and have these conversations as a professional learning community is going to deepen everyone's understanding of critical multiculturalism and what that means for educational reform. An additional layer that can be extremely helpful for these students is having same ethnicity employment. This provides role models and mentors for these students in a figure that is familiar and someone that they can trust. However, in order for the Hispanic and ELL community in the United States to achieve the same goals as their white student counterparts, this needs to be a systemic change. meaning critical multiculturalism needs to be applied in public education everywhere. Additionally, we need to adjust requirements for modifications in order to make sure that they are accommodating the needs of the Hispanic and Latinx ELL learners, and continually being advocates for immigrant, ELL, and minority populations within the US. So that is my observations. That is my study. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very kindly. Very nice.
Thank you, Hannah.